Welcome to towards the middle of day 3. How's everyone doing? Okay, good. Everyone is staying hydrated. Most important question. Raise your hand if you have not had at least 3 bottles of Fiji water today. You guys get on it, this thing. Thank you guys so much for being here. My name is Emily Gibson. I'm one of the co-founders of the festival. We work all year for this, and the magic doesn't start until all of you guys arrive. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being here. Who doesn't know that ATX has a podcast? Oh, we are winning this game. Excellent. Okay, we have one. You now know ATX has a podcast. There are many things happening right now. The things you aren't in right now, you can listen to this summer, the TV Campfire. This panel that I'm about to introduce, Jen and Kate worked tirelessly on this panel, and they had to be pulled in different directions, and I'm really sad that they're not here to introduce it. They started working on this panel last year because it was something that was very, very important to them. Oh my gosh, I'm just about to get emotional. We are all affected by mental health in our daily lives, ourselves, our friends, our families, and the way it's portrayed on TV really makes a difference, and how it's handled and the truth and honesty of it. And these shows, these creators are about to talk about it, have all handled it in very different ways, in ways that you wouldn't necessarily think they're talking about mental health. And that's a very, very cool thing for television and for us to be representing here at the festival. So I'm going to bring out, you're not supposed to play favorites, but this is one of my favorite people, Ben Travers, who will be moderating the panel, and he'll bring out the panelists. You go there, and this goes.
Thank you, Emily. That was very kind of you. You're obviously one of my favorites as well. Who's excited to be here? Who's excited to dig in? All right, great. We've got such a full house. Thank you all for coming out. I know there's so much going on at the festival, so for you to make the time to be here is really exciting. So let's get right to it. First and foremost, I want to introduce the Haunting of Hill House co-showrunner, executive producer, and writer, Meredith Averill. Next up, we've got the star of Midnight Texas and the upcoming Lincoln, not to mention, a dozen other shows that I'm sure you love. ATX's own Arielle Kebbel.
Oh, where my name is. Happy Saturday.
It's hard to see sometimes. It's dark up here. They haven't turned the lights on. Yeah. Next up, fresh off the One Day at a Time panel across the street, the creator, writer, and executive producer, Mike Royce. And last but certainly not least, the creator, writer, executive producer, and director of FX's You're the Worst, Stephen Falk. All right, thanks for coming out, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
You're a little bit
versus
distanced
boys.
here.
Yeah. And also, can I just say thank you all for coming. It is incredible to see a room full of people showing up for this panel. I know it's important to all of us, but so thank you already for being here. It's inspiring.
Very well said. And to kick things off, I kind of wanted to start with a little bit of perspective and just try to get your read on when you first remember this topic coming up in television, because obviously it's getting a lot of traction. We're paying a lot more attention to mental illness and dealing with it in a variety of different ways on TV. But for each of you, do you remember kind of the first time you noticed somebody talking about it kind of openly and honestly on TV, and what your reaction was to it? And anybody who has the first thought can start, I guess.
Openly and honestly, I don't know.
I mean, I think I remember a time when there used to be when shows would have a very special episode, right? And that they would tackle something, specific. And what I think is nice now is that you no longer have that. Every episode can be its own sort of very special episode, and you don't have to be like, oh, this is this episode that's going to be about this now, and it suddenly takes a totally different shift in tone. But that we've kind of driven away from that model, I think is kind of great.
Yeah, I mean, I have these vague memories when I was a kid watching MASH reruns, and there seemed to be a lot of, maybe not as direct and open, but certainly hitting on what is clearly going to be a lot of PTSD and a lot of the traumas of war in a sitcom setting. That, as a little kid, to me was absolutely fucking baffling and mind-blowing. I was like, I thought this was like a funny ha-ha show. But to see them sort of take those things on was really remarkable.
And this might sound like a lighter note, but I remember watching Ally McBeal with the dancing baby. Ooga chaka, ooga chaka, ooga. And clearly I loved the dancing baby, but I remember I used to watch it with my family, and I remember thinking like, wow, I've never seen like a lead, especially female character, kind of have these like checkout moments where it's like, you know, the people in front of her are seeing one thing and one thing's happening and she's experiencing a completely different other thing. And on certain days it like helps her get through the day, and on other days it drives her nuts, you know? And I remember thinking like, yeah, I do that too. Like sometimes I feel like whoever's talking to me and I'm actually like stabbing them in the eye or like, you know, like doing something where it's like, but you can't say those things, but you're feeling those things. And I liked how in a very like comedic way, they brought that in. They brought out these kind of like checkout moments. And I feel like, you know, I remember as a kid that felt very relatable.
Well, spinning off the idea of using comedy as kind of an access point, I was curious, especially from Stephen and Mike, just when you kind of decided to incorporate these ideas of PTSD, of anxiety, depression into your comedies, were you intimidated at all? Were you worried that, you know, I don't know if this is going to fit because, you know, like you said, that this is supposed to be ha-ha, people are expecting something very funny, and yet we're going to address something in an honest way and have that conversation? Yeah, I mean, for me, so we debuted, I guess, 5-6 years ago on my show You're the Worst, and the first season we didn't bring it up. My little show You're the Worst. That was not meant for that. And the first season we sort of set up these really kind of broken garbage people, for lack of a better word. And when we got a second season, I knew I was a little surprised because our ratings were not that great. But I knew people were enjoying it, and so when we got a second season, we were sort of like, well, now we can, like, it just felt like bonus, like extra free baseball. Like now, okay, they're giving us a second season. Let's like really do something here, and not only, you know, crassly to get, you know, maybe get some ink and some attention, but also we had this great opportunity to delve into, like, really do an origin story for someone's brokenness. And for me, that notion of getting to sort of go deeper into a character and explaining what we had set up already and show why this person is this way, you know, that she suffers from depression, has her whole life, and boom, right when her relationship seems to be in a good place, here it comes again. And that was incredibly scary when we brought it up in the writer's room, but my brain is broken in such a way that if I bring something up like that, if it's mentioned, if it's on the board, I have to do it because it seems so intimidating. And so when I pitched the season to FX, I was deeply worried, but they are incredibly smart people, but they kind of stared at me and said, wait, you want to do a romantic comedy about clinical depression this season? And I was like, yeah, but I really, really think I know how to make it interesting and funny. I had no idea how to make it interesting and funny. Just when John Landgraf's staring at you with those eyes with 180 IQ popping out of them, you have to pretend. And so our mandate was to take something that can seem very, can seem very static at times, making it interesting. And what I realized it was for us was placing it in the context of a relationship, what a mental illness does to the relationship. And once we kept that as the focus, that instantly led to conflict, which is just another name for story.
As far as so on One Day at a Time, our character. Thank you. That's the way to. Thank you. Sorry, I just want to show you how to. You should acknowledge. Anyway, I wanted to. No. Our character has anxiety and depression and PTSD, and I'm only separating those things out because when we started, I wasn't. So I had done. This is terrible. Yeah, do it. Let me do it the right way. I had done a little show called Enlisted, and I'm so sorry. So on Enlisted, Kevin Beagle really wanted to deal with PTSD. Obviously, we were talking about soldiers here. So I had already done this a little bit, and we had hired some really great consultants to talk to us about all this stuff. So we went into it a little bit. We hired the same consultants on One Day at a Time to talk to us about PTSD. And we also interviewed a couple. It wasn't the plan. It's sort of the people that, Norman Lear's company helped us find some. They just turned out to be people who gave us enormous amounts of story. It was a married couple that wasn't together anymore. They met in the Army, and she came in one day and talked to us for 2 hours. It was, Walt, just the most compelling story you've ever heard. And she said she suffers from PTSD, but she's in a relationship with was in a relationship with her husband who also suffered from PTSD in a different sense. And she told us she had PTSD from being in a relationship with someone with PTSD. And it sounds, it's almost the way you say it sounds like a joke, but it was not a joke, obviously. He came in and was just, I felt very sorry for him because here is a person who had gone through so much, and she had really put her life back together and he had not. And he was self-medicating a lot. He was extremely mistrustful of the VA. And I'm just saying all this is where all these stories came from. We just, I'm just a stupid writer. Like, I like to tell stories. I like to tell stories about things that are compelling. These are all things I have not experienced these things. So we just took from their lives with their permission and sort of built our characters that way.
Well, Meredith, I wanted to ask about The Haunting of Hill House because I feel like genre. Comedy obviously has its own challenges, but horror has had a lot of.
Your show terrifies me.
Yeah,
in a good way.
You're welcome, and I'm sorry.
But there's a lot of great traumatic stories within horror that are taken very seriously and depicted very honestly, and at the same time, audiences can dismiss those stories because they're just like, it's just a scary story. It's a ghost story, or it's something where I don't have to take it that seriously. So with yours, what was it that kind of helped you delineate? Like, did the show help you and help viewers delineate between someone who has anxiety and someone who's afraid? Like, did you look at it and see it as an opportunity to kind of say, this is what somebody's really going through, and then this is what you can feel because of it on other issues?
Yeah, I think, we always approached it from character. So, we looked at a character like Nell, who was someone who was voiceless and felt that no one was listening to her whole life. She was trying to tell her family that this house was bad and no one would listen to her. And so when we were thinking about what she might be suffering from, this isn't a mental illness, it's a sleep disorder, but we talked about sleep paralysis, which I actually happen to also suffer from. So it felt sort of like this natural pairing of being able to, take a ailment and kind of prescribe it and give it to a character, but it also had an emotional reason for it. And I think that is, for us, that was always the way we sort of built our characters and what they were suffering from. Why did it make sense for Luke to be addicted to drugs? Because he needed something to numb himself from the trauma of what happened to him in the house. So I think because we always approach it from that way and not, what would be cool? It'd be cool if she had sleep paralysis, because that's really scary, because that means she can't move and she can see the bent neck lady and she can't. We didn't approach it from that way. And it's pretty cool that it happened to be really scary, and you get that really you get that nice genre horror element from it. But I think what people really responded to about the show was how emotional it was, in addition to the fact that it scared the shit out of them, which is great. But I also think the surprising thing that came from it that we're all so proud of the show for is that it moved people. And so, I think what we're seeing now, especially with horror, is, their quote unquote elevated horror that is about something. And, you have Get Out and you have Hereditary, and they're taking on these really serious issues, which I think is really exciting. But it also, imbues us with a lot of responsibility to tell those stories with sensitivity, because what's a little yikesy to me is if you start equating a mental illness with, for example, demonic possession, which I think is very easy to do, and is, for me, just personally, I think that's doing a disservice to people who actually suffer from that mental illness. It kind of minimizes it, it sensationalizes it in a way. So I think, as excited as I am that the genre is kind of moving in this direction, I do think that there's this added weight of responsibility on us to make sure that we're always treating those issues with sensitivity, regardless of the genre, of course, but definitely in the horror genre for sure.
Well, speaking of that responsibility, Arielle, you're playing somebody with PTSD in an upcoming show called Lincoln. Right, Lincoln, sight unseen, deserving it, of course.
I'm sorry, what was... it was just so loud in here with applause.
Never a problem, always a good thing. But what kind of preparation did you do for that part, and how did you kind of take that responsibility on your shoulders as an actor to make sure that you were portraying this accurately, and why is that an important thing to do?
Sure. First of all, I am, as the only actress on this panel, I'm very grateful and honored to be on this panel with each of you. I love your shows, and I love hearing you say already what you've said and shared, and it's so important and it's so beautiful. So I'm happy to be here with you all, and thank you for doing what you're doing. Also, I tested for enlisted. Anyways. But that's cool. I love Angelique.
Also, not a long-running show, so you may have...
So going back, my character Lincoln is based on The Bone Collector. So I play Officer Amelia Sachs, originally played by Angelina Jolie, and in the pilot we learn that part of her backstory is she suffers from PTSD and multiple anxiety disorders. And when I read this script, literally page 2, I was like, I need to bring this character to life. I know her, I get her, I know she's gonna teach me things, I know that there's things I need to bring to her. I just have to do this. And that doesn't happen all the time. So when it does, I really, really pay attention. And in my personal life, with some characters, I have to do a lot of outside research. Like I will put myself in certain situations. If I'm playing a doctor, I will go to hospitals and do that sort of a thing. With this particular role, there was so much inside of me, I felt like waiting to come out. With both my own personal experience with mental health and also my family and very close friends, it's very public knowledge. My sister went missing a year ago. We found her. She's doing incredible. She is very outspoken on her Instagram about her mental health journey. And during that time, it was one of the scariest times of my life and my family's. And when we found her, we went public for help. And when we found her as part of my own healing and my family's healing, I think the biggest thing I learned about myself during that time was how much I'd kept inside out of a way of protecting her or my family, thinking I was doing the right thing by not talking about it because it wasn't necessarily maybe my place. But in not talking about it, I forgot to remember that I wasn't taking care of myself either. And I think there's a really fine line. Obviously, I'm not going to tell my sister's personal story. That's for her to tell. But I am allowed to speak about what I'm going through. And I felt like, I have my own anxiety issues, and so I felt like when I read this character, I was getting hit from two sides. I was getting hit from the side of like, okay, how do I bring my story to life? Because I've actually been so busy protecting other people's stories, I haven't yet given myself a chance to tell my own, and how important that is. And also, in the pilot, my sister goes missing. So yes. Thank you, BJ and Mark. So how do I also show the strength and brokenness of someone searching for a family member? And what I will always remember too was the sense of community. I have never felt, I mean, we joke about Instagram, but I have never felt the power of Instagram more than in that situation. And I learned it was safe to share what I was going through. And I felt like the community was holding me up and holding my family up in a time that I was just like, my God, for the rest of my life, I want to honor that and find different ways in my art to talk about the power of community and truly what it meant to me. So those are all things I want to bring to the character.
I mean, thank you for sharing. That's shockingly like how much there is to connect with in that part, and you're able to get it. That's going to be very exciting to watch. And in terms of kind of knowing that those connections are so personal, that when we are talking about these kind of issues, they do connect on such a level that can be a lot deeper than other things that come up on TV or movies or other shows. You talked a little bit, Mike, about the kind of the consultants that come in and the research that you did. But what's the key to making you feel comfortable about it? Because again, like you said, you're a writer. You're telling somebody else's story. You're trying to represent something honestly. What kind of research do you do to make sure that you're there? That makes you feel like, okay, I've got this.
Well, yeah, it's certainly getting their permission to open up about things, and for the purposes of we might use this as part of the show. Is the first thing. We're just trying. It's something like anything having to do with mental health. You have to take extra steps to make sure you're getting it right, because the harm in putting out misinformation or depicting something in a way that could affect people just has multiple. I just feel like TV can have a lot of impact, and if you put something out there that's a story that is putting out misinformation, you can really harm some people. So when it comes to PTSD, we had to certainly go outside of our circle of writers to research. Anxiety and depression, we did not. We had a teeming group of experts who came in every day, sometimes. That's right. We have a country full of experts. And the things that we dealt with in the second season, where Penelope tries to go off her meds, and was all picked from people opening up in the room and telling their story. And we really wanted to tell that story because we wanted to make it. The people who were going through this felt it was very important to put the message out there that there's no need to be a hero. If you try to be a hero, bad things will happen. There's no, taking care of yourself is the paramount thing when it comes to anxiety and depression. Medication and whatever else you're doing to help yourself with that doesn't, it's not a weakness to have to continue on it. And, we're really proud of that particular show because of sending that message. And we did a show in last season about panic attacks. And I'm already off the rails because we had a whole thing about anxiety attacks versus panic attacks. And right now somebody can probably correct me out there because they're different. And so I apologize if I'm already mislabeling, but a friend of mine was unintentionally demonstrated to me. It was actually quite, it was for me an incredible thing to witness. Came in on the phone, I immediately knew something was wrong. There's a lot of heavy breathing, a lot of, and clearly it was just, I was like, maybe somebody died and the person was very upset. And then they hung up the phone and turned to me and said, "That's a panic attack." And the switch, like, basically the person on the other end was helping them calm down. And it was a system that they had in place. Basically, it was their go-to sort of way of dealing with when they were in that situation. So we thought that would be a valuable sort of theme for a show of, how, different ways of coping and showing Penelope do that. So, if it ever gets into medical stuff, then you have to definitely go out and, we also had a nurse practitioner consultant who would come in and help us with that stuff. But yeah, I guess we just try to think about it in every sense and go, are we getting this right? Is this vetted in the way it needs to be vetted? And go from there.
Well, I mean, Stephen, with You're the Worst, one of the things that struck me about kind of how the show developed over the years was especially in relation to Edgar's character and how much my conversations with Desmond Borges changed when he went through that arc about his PTSD. And one of the things that was brought up, very clearly in the show and made very clear in the show and also talked about a lot outside of it was when, this specific veteran was seeking treatment, it was extremely difficult to go through Veteran Affairs and to get what he needed from them. And again, like everybody's become so outspoken about it, which is so great, and they've drawn this spotlight to it. But on your end, like what went into discovering that and putting it on the screen? Like, why was that so important?
Yeah, I mean, I swear my show's a comedy, but we have a veteran on the show, and that's always just sort of been a weird secret pet issue of mine. Because I'm such a pussy, I would never go to war, and it's not something that hipster, mostly white writer Hollywood people ever do, and they don't write about it. There are very few veterans in writers' rooms, and the Writers Guild has a really good program to try to change that. But as such, you don't see that a lot, and I always have thought that was a shame. Because we need visibility on veterans issues. And so, I put that character in from the pilot, knowing that I wanted to sort of delve into it more and more as time went on. And, the veterans we were talking to and Desmond Borges was talking to, some of the complaints about trying to deal with the VA, not only the stigma, which is real and terrible, but also just the pure hell. Like, you think it's hard to make a doctor's appointment and find the right specialist on your plan. With them, it's really difficult, and the over medication is so we just really wanted to do that, and so we did this episode called 22 in the third season, which is sort of about the maybe apocryphal number of veteran suicides that happen per day. There's some debate about that. And Edgar ends up sort of having a day of it after going off his meds for sexual reasons. And likewise, we wanted to be very careful and depict all sides. But some of the veterans we talked to, one of the things they said the most, I was like, so what do you want? What would you want from us, from a depiction of this? And they were like, it's not all serious. Like, we are funny. Like, we like to bust balls and we like to talk shit. And so we have, he runs into this tow truck driver who talks about all the different ways. He goes to the VA in the episode, has a bad runaround with one of the chiefs over there, and self-medicates. And he runs into this tow truck driver who talks about all the different ways. His buddy does yoga, another one hikes. He has a dog, this tow truck driver. And one of the veterans we met had a dog that saves his life, that literally saved his life. There's a group that hooks veterans up with a dog, and he was like this macho dude and wanted he was like, I want a fucking pit bull, and they gave him this tiny shitty little dog, and he was like, no. But he says the dog literally saved his life. It can tell when he's feeling anxious or when he's feeling violent, and the dog will lean his head on him, and I felt a lot of responsibility to do that. But it's a rich story, and really just visibility is key, and it's all about shame, and to begin to unlock that shame with visibility, I think, is the best thing that we dumb writers can do.
Also, I'm not a vet, but my cat is upstairs in my hotel room, and she travels with me. She's incredible, but it is a very, very real thing on multiple levels. Multiple healing.
Well, Meredith, you talked about this a little bit earlier, but kind of in terms of that, again, that responsibility that TV shows and creators and writers have when they know they're going to be dealing with that issue. I mean, can you talk just a little bit about what that responsibility is? Like when you know you're about to incorporate that character, what do you feel is kind of the most important aspect on your end of representing somebody or representing that mental illness?
Well, we have a lot of discussion about the issue in the room, and I want to always create a room that feels safe for everyone to be able to voice all of their concerns or about tackling a specific issue. Having been in a room where I felt was unsafe and I myself had a concern about the way a certain issue was handled, like I remember what that felt like sweaty palms, like shaking, like to bring something up that I was like wanted to raise a flag, and you want people to feel that they can raise a flag because the last thing you want to do is offend, and so you want to treat it all very sensitively. And we also, as writers in the room, you're also mining everyone's own stories for story, and so especially with a lot of the issues within Hill House, anxiety, depression, but there was also addiction. And one of our writers is a recovering heroin addict, and they are very vocal about the fact that they are and happy to tell stories about it. And so we had one of our characters was also an addict as well. So we mined a lot of this writer's stories, and there was always, you have to be very delicate when you do that because the last thing you want to do is trigger them, So I remember I was writing a scene in one of my episodes in which this character, Luke, has to inject heroin into his foot. And having never injected heroin into my own foot, I don't know what that is like. I don't know, wanting it to be authentic and wanting to know what does a balloon of heroin look like, and what does one then do with that balloon, and what is with the spoon and the lighter and the thing, like wanting it all to feel very authentic. And I remember calling this writer and saying, I want to ask you a question about how this works, but I also don't want to put you in a place where you feel uncomfortable talking about it, because my God, the last thing I would want to do is trigger them and put them back into a place. But this writer, it was so important to them for it to be authentic on the screen that they were, luckily very happy. I shouldn't say happy. Who would be happy to talk about that? But they wanted to walk me through the steps. And I think that added so much. I mean, it would be, if we hadn't had that, we would have gone to a consultant, and certainly wanted to get that authenticity. But I think, it's about making sure you're having all the conversations in the room and not making decisions lightly, and making sure you're getting all perspectives and feeling like you can create a safe space where a writer can raise their hand and say, I actually think we're going a little too far with this. And have we considered what we're saying by making this character do this? And being able to have those conversations in the room, because those are the conversations that the audiences are going to be having. And it's okay to do something that can be considered slightly controversial if it feels authentic. But I think you need to have the conversation in the room and acknowledge it first.
Well, Arielle, with that in mind as an actor, I mean, you've obviously, whether it's a personal connection that you have yourself, so you trust that you know what this character is going through, or whether it's, research you've done on your own end to kind of prepare for it. Is there a right way to go to, the writer, the showrunner, the director, and talk about like, well, hey, we might need to tweak this and present this in a different way, or hey, I want to approach it like this.
You demand it. I'm just kidding. That's why I didn't get unlisted. I'm just kidding. No, I mean that's a great question. I think it's very individual. It's a case by case basis. every actor has a different personality, every writer creator has a different personality. So I think just having an open, ongoing discussion is really important. Having a close hand with your writer creator, trusting them, having them trust you to build, like to collaborate is really what it's about. It's about collaborating, right? Because I have to trust the story they've created, and in turn they're trusting me to kind of bring it to life and inspire those emotions in little places that maybe weren't on the page. And so in talking with Mark and VJ, man, they really gave it to me in the pilot. My character, so I'm a cop, but in the pilot, not only searching for the bone collector, you see in my opening scene, I'm getting ready, I'm late for work, I'm popping pills, drinking coffee, very quick into the episode, you see my anxiety, you learn that I'm disqualified from the FBI, not on my application. They turned me down not because I had mental health conditions, but because I lied about my application because I was afraid if they found out, they wouldn't accept me. And then it goes to my PTSD breakdown when my sister goes missing, and I'm stuck between my moment of panic, I can't breathe, it's all my fault, how did I do this, my own anxiety issues, to there's the freaking guy, I'm running after him and going. And so there's like this quick turn between everything I'm physically going through, and then I gotta go get this guy because he's got my sister. And the layers of that, talking about that process with Mark and VJ, there was a few things that popped out at me. And the first was like, okay, well, I can't just be popping pills because medication is a very real thing. And, one thing that I know personally is like when it's a struggle, I find, to get the dosage right. It's almost like it's a hit and miss. And when someone's going through, whether it's bipolar disorder or depression or anxiety, when your medication is off, it's a horrible, horrible thing. And to get it right is a tricky balance. And so that was one discussion. Another discussion was talking about being disqualified from the FBI because it was a pilot and we're short on time. We were trying to rearrange certain paragraphs and cut things and edit things. And I just went to them privately and I just said, guys, I get the timing issue. You can cut my other stuff, I don't care. But when it comes to this sentence, we cannot cut it. And the sentence is, having mental disability does not disqualify you from the FBI. Lying about it does. And I know firsthand because in talking about my sister, she was working for NBC Universal. They've been incredible to her through this process, continue to be, were back then. But it was, she has a legal right to her mental health. She has a legal right to her medication. She has a legal right to know that she can show up and work every day and also go through the things she's going through personally. Obviously, she has to show up for work and do her job, but that every American has a legal right to their mental health and to feel safe in the work environment. And I really wanted to show that this cop, who's this strong, intuitive cop, is internally struggling with so much, and she's afraid to almost like live out her dream of being in the FBI because she's afraid of being turned away and she's afraid of what that's going to do to her. And I felt like that was very real to bring to the table because, like I said earlier, I've been afraid to talk about my issues with being honest with myself and what I've been through, and then also with my family members. And so that was important. And then finally, with the breakdown, I really wanted to show how, sometimes, real life happens fast, right? You don't have time to, be like, okay, now I'm gonna have my PTSD breakdown. Okay, thanks. If everybody could just give me a minute, thanks so much. You don't have time for that. It happens when it's not supposed to happen, right? That's what brings it on. And so then you're caught in this moment of how do I literally live through this and also get back to all of the life things that I'm supposed to be doing? And that anxiety keeps the spiral going even more. And it's And so I wanted to show like, oh my God, I physically can't breathe. I'm gonna throw up. I've got Lincoln in my ear telling me to go after a guy. My sister's missing. There's cops everywhere. And oh my God, there he is. Go run and get him. And you're literally from one moment to the next. She's still shaking. She's still crying, but she's running for her life after this guy. And to me, it might be an exaggerated example, but I felt like, you know, we've all been there when we're having anxiety or depression or suicidal thoughts or whatever it is. We're having them at the worst time. And how do you process that? And how do you make yourself move on from that moment to the next moment and show it authentically and real and the pain and the strength in that? And I think that anyone who battles any mental health issue is strong. They are not weak. They are so strong. And that's really important for me to show as the season goes on.
So that's very well said. And we've got a big group here, so I want to make sure we have time to get to audience questions. So start thinking of them right now, and then we're gonna get to it right after this. But one of the growing topics around mental health, and especially mental health on TV, is the depiction of suicide and how problematic that can be. And you know, certain shows have gotten, you know, a lot of flack for kind of either, you know, just treating it dismissively or not taking it seriously enough, or, you know, worst case scenario, kind of glorifying the act or romanticizing the act. How do you go about treating that end result seriously as something that could, you know, potentially happen to a character who's suffering from these things, but not validating that kind of fatalistic thinking, like not giving that any sort of glorification or romanticizing it at all?
I think through a lot of heavy conversation in the writers' room, but also keeping your focus on story. Really, I mean, that's how we sort of get past any of these really kind of tough ethical questions. You know, not everyone experiences any of these things the same way, and I certainly know I hear from a lot of people about not only depression but PTSD in terms of our show, and occasionally I do hear from someone who says that's not at all how it manifests for me, and that's always a danger. But it's also, I mean, yeah, not everyone manifests the same way, and I think as long as you know what you're doing in terms of story and character is for a point, is important, and is right for the show, and moreover is right for the story, I think you will have an internal modulation that doesn't allow you to do something like glorifying suicide, which sounds so horrific. I don't even know where to start with that one.
That was great.
And avoiding using it as a trope for sort of shock value, which I think is used a lot in especially horror, telling a fully formed story about a character who is on an arc, and at the end of that arc is choosing to take their life for whatever reason, I think, and you've thought about those steps that they have taken to get to that place, and you're not choosing to do it simply because it's going to shock the audience.
All right, well, let's get to the audience questions. We've got a big group here. I don't know, do we have microphones, or is this...
Is there music playing, or am I hallucinating?
No, I definitely hear something. I think
My
it's from...
cat, that's right.
I think we'll probably just call on... Or no, we do have mics. Okay, how about here on the right-hand side, like 4 rows back? Yeah.
Thank you so much here for being here today. It's a very important topic to talk about. So one question I have for all of you, outside of the shows that you personally have worked on, what do you think are some of the best portrayals of mental illness that you've seen on television? Why do you think they were so well done?
I don't have an answer to the question, and the reason is because it's there's for the reason that many people there's so much to watch. I almost want to ask you, in all seriousness, is there something you want to recommend? Because I feel always when people ask me questions like that, I'm like, damn it, I don't watch enough stuff. I'm watching, I feel like I'm watching stuff, but And if I think long and hard enough, I bet you I can come up with something. But this it speaks to my insecurity about just not knowing anything.
Honestly, I would say you're the worst. Sorry.
It's so good. It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
But I actually was gonna say couldn't give a specific one character, but going back to what you said about your show, and I really like that in the horror genre, there's these mental health issues coming up, because I also personally believe like we are all such sensitive human beings, and whether you believe in the other side or ghosts or paranormal or energy or healing, any of the spectrum, I believe in all of it. But wherever you fall on there, I also believe that part of the problem is that we forget to remember how sensitive we are. And so, the more that we open that and acknowledge that and really treat each other with such sensitivity, I feel like the mental health conversation can become easier. And sometimes I feel like, people are treated for hallucinations and these things need to be taken seriously. And a lot of times medication does need to be involved. So I'm not knocking that. But I also really believe in talking about things on a deeper, more sensitive, spiritual level. And I think we kind of just try to ignore that side of things and just medicate or get the definitive answer. And sometimes I think there isn't a definitive answer. It can be both. You can need medication and you can be incredibly sensitive or spiritually tapped in or whatever you want to call it. And I would just encourage people to kind of do their own research on that, because I really do feel like in the future, that's another place I would like to see the mental health conversation going, is to the more spiritual side and what we can do to open that up. There's a reason people heal through yoga and animals, and horses are one of the most intuitive animals, and there's a reason people can see themselves back in that animal, and it causes healing through equine therapy. And so I don't know, I think it's something very cool that's happening in horror right now, because it can lead breadcrumb trails to a bigger conversation.
I will say BoJack Horseman does this very, very well.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. See, there you go.
It's animated, but.
And Orange is the New Black, I think, does a great job.
Crazy Ex-Girlfriend also, but see, I'm still catching up. I'm not even up to, I'm still behind on that. So.
All right, do we have other questions? Yeah, right here in the front, if we can. I don't know where the.
I love your hair.
Thank you. So I actually have very severe PTSD from a situation that I was in from the moment I was born until roughly 4 years ago. And this festival was actually a big reason I ended up leaving that situation. And my question to you guys is, do you have any advice for people with mental health issues who want to break into the industry? Because I feel like many of us have a story to tell and we've never seen any sort of representation of ourselves on TV, because by the time we get to the point we feel we can tell these stories, there's been so many odds stacked up against us that we don't even know where to start or who to talk to.
Well, I will say that it feels to me like this is the moment. There's such a, even if it's a guilt-driven one, there's a thirst for inclusivity and for different voices. So good news, it's a good time. Bad news, there's still a giant wall to climb over that surrounds Hollywood and us. But I do know that people are thirsty for it. And in general, when trying to break into writing, what we're looking for is exactly who you are and what you bring to the table, not what you think you can mimic the voices of our show or something else, or some generic kind of Hollywood writer person. We are looking for the girl with the teddy bear and the colored hair in the front row. Honestly, one of my mentors, Genji Kohan, comes from the same stock and the same line, and so the more diverse voices, they're hungry for them. Doesn't remove the barriers, but exactly who you are is who executives are going to be looking for.
Are you wanting to break in with writing? Is that right? With writing.
Since I was 12.
Okay. Have you like posted anything or written an article or anything sharing your story?
So I have not had a lot of opportunity, and it's really nerdy, but the only thing I've really done has been fan fiction. I know that's terrible, but I have
A lot of great stuff happens in fan fiction. It's an easy way to tell important stories.
One of my stories is number 10 most reviewed out of over 7,000 in that fandom. So that's the only work I've been able to put out there because I don't know where to put anything original.
Well, that's amazing. Congratulations. I was just having a conversation with Carina Mckenzie, who's an amazing writer. I don't know if she's here, but where is she? Is she here? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, she's amazing. She's the creator of Roswell and many other things. But we were talking about this last night, and things she said, like, there are certain stories I want to write that I'm afraid to, and I haven't yet. And she was saying, she's like, there's certain things that only you can tell. And piggybacking off of what you were saying, like, your story is special because it's your story, and no one else can tell it. And knowing that you have a place to tell that story. And I would say, like, start small, post a small article, send it around to different, the outlets that you respect and admire. Start sprinkling little things. I don't know if you're on social media, but on your social media, like, we're actually living in a time where you don't need to, it's great to have mentors and all these things, but you can also be very proactive and start sprinkling it in everything that you do. And that will spread. And so I think, remembering that your story is important and that you control it, and taking baby steps at a time may make you feel more empowered and more clear on what you want to do next.
Yeah, and if I could just give a little, I guess, writing advice, it's because they're exactly right. Being yourself has never been actually more of an asset now. People are brands. I'm old white guy. All right, that's not a great brand. See, this is the problem. Actually, we need less of me and more of you is what's happening. But short, the problem with writing is it always seems so, oh my God, I gotta write a whole, it's just so daunting. And I swear, just anything short, and I mean, I'm not kidding when I say I sometimes now approach outlines and scripts when I'm just like, oh, like so much work ahead of me. I don't know if this is good. And every time, I'm a fraud, I'm an imposter. It's all, the same. It comes up. It never stops. That's the good news. You can look forward to a future of thinking you're a fraud. So if you have that now, you'll still have it later. It's great. But I have actually literally said, okay, I have to write an outline. That's like 400 tweets. But in little bite-sized chunks, if you just think of it, everything is just a brick in the wall that you're building. 1 brick a day, 1 brick an hour, 1 brick a month. Every little step you take is praise yourself, give yourself a break, do something that makes you happy. You don't just, think of it, just take it a step at a time. And calling cards are really, they get people's attention. A lot of us just, when you're staffing, you don't have time to read giant things half the time. So if someone writes a 3-page essay or a 1-page essay or a 1-paragraph funny thing that, I know who you are, I know you're funny, or in my case, I'm just looking at a lot of comedy, or I know what you're all about, that's compelling. Short is not only easier, but it's recommended as far as getting people's attention.
All right, I want to make sure we can get to a few more. Right here in the front again, I think. I'm sorry, I keep making you run every time. I'm sorry.
Thank you. So I'm a little curious about your experience in this, and also maybe some advice when you're creating characters who are suffering, who do the wrong things, hurt the people they love, sabotage themselves. How do you sort of mitigate, and what's your relationship with the expectation of likability for those characters? Yeah.
That whole likability.
Oh, likability. Likability used to be a giant buzzword in Hollywood. Like, are they likable? And it's fucking stupid. And I would just say, as long as you're creating a character, yes, there's a line at which behavior becomes just nasty and abhorrent for no value to the show, right? If someone's just doing shitty things There's no consequence, or it's not even interesting or funny enough. But if it has inherent value to the story, again, getting back to that, or reveals something about their character, or deepens or complicates a relationship that's important in the show that, again, drives story, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, during the 5 years of our show, there were a lot of times we were just like, no, that's too shitty. We can't have Jimmy do that. And then I'd go, I mean, but we can, come on. Why not?
It's you're the worst.
Yeah. Yeah, the name's in there. But I wouldn't be afraid of it. Just make sure it's original and interesting, germane to the character, and generates conflict, i.e. story.
And sometimes you get to a place where you're having a character do a thing and you just acknowledge in the room, well, you know that once they do that, we burn that character.
Yeah.
And you have to all just acknowledge that that's going to be okay. I wasn't in the Game of Thrones writer's room this past season, but I imagine or wonder if they had a discussion about, okay, Starbucks. When we have Cersei, cut off the head of, give me her name, I'm sure everybody knows her name. There you go. I knew you all would know. When she does that, we've burned her. At least for me as an audience member, I was like, oh, okay, this super complicated, complex. Is she a villain? Is she not? I don't know. Oh, when they did that with her, I was like, oh, you've just burned her. I can't follow you anymore. And so that's for me. I personally had that reaction. I don't know if others did. But if I were in the writer's room, I would say that's a decision that you've made to burn a character. There's, that. So I think that also has to be part of it. And because it's okay for a character to do something like that. You just have to acknowledge that you're going down a certain path with them that you cannot bring them back from.
Right, I'll try to do some of the back. This guy right here with the hat on the, yep.
So, I mean, maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's correlation, maybe it's confirmation bias, but it seems like the incidence of anti-vaxxing coincided with Hollywood kind of using the autism spectrum as a shorthand trope for being an asshole. I mean, is there, as writers and actors working in the trenches, is there something that can be done to kind of change the course of that discussion?
Wait, so can you give example? I'm very curious about this. What examples are of shorthand Asperger's for asshole?
Like Sheldon on Big Bang Theory, and characters where they're just saying that they're autistic, and that kind of excuses them from being people that you can just give a full range of emotions to.
The next thing I'm doing is a movie at Sony about a guy with Asperger's, and it's true. And so and he's not an asshole at all. It's about that the possibility and capability of love for someone who still has a hard time reading people. I would never do that, but I think that I know what you're talking about. Don't do that, writers. That's
All right, let's get to a few more if we can. Right here in the middle section.
Hello, thank you guys again for doing this. So far as representing non-neurotypical characters on screen, we've seen a lot of attentiveness to empathy and getting that right. I'm curious about when you're staffing up a writer's room and making writers feel safe to acknowledge their own mental health issues. What are y'all doing, if anything? Well, I know that you guys are clearly doing a whole lot, but how do you approach, before you're actually in the room writing a story about a certain disorder or experience, in the staffing process, making folks feel safe to acknowledge that they have that disorder or have had that experience without, I know there's just so many terrible anecdotes about being discouraged from discussing a disability or disorder or experience because it will make whomever is potentially staffing you question whether you can do the job.
I mean, again, I think there's a guilt and shame thing happening that's coming from top up in the companies, and I can speak to FX. John Landgraf, when we were there weren't very many African American or diverse or female directors on FX shows. And FX was the last.
All the things.
Yeah. And so he made it, he said, well, we are not only going to improve, we're going to be #1 next year. And they did. They bullied us. They hectored all their showrunners. And it was absolutely great and necessary. And it forces, and so I guess by spillover effect, I began to really look at how I staff and how other people staff and really make it, make it not only a safe space, but make it as sort of diverse and representative as possible. And so I think the way it happens is from the top down. We can do a certain amount, but I think it also has to be part of the corporate culture. And so we have to be vocal about it. Those studies that then the Hollywood Reporter and Variety write about, they have to keep writing about them, or IndieWire, and shaming. And
Nice.
shaming, I mean, the companies have to be shamed. They really do.
And also, I'm not in the writer's room, but I would say, like, going along with that, there's power in numbers. We're seeing that everywhere right now with these issues coming up and it being the time to talk about them. And also, I would say, like, if you are a writer or going into any job, you know, like I mentioned earlier, like, research your rights. I think a lot of what's happening right now is we are starting to see these things on television, and that's a really inspiring thing, but we have a long way to go. The discussion is just starting. And so it can be uncomfortable, especially if you feel like you're the only one. But it's also, like, I think education is always power. Knowledge is power, right? So the more you know your legal rights going into something, I feel like maybe the more comfortable you may be to use your voice. And then that may be inspiring someone else and someone else and someone else. And so, you know, if you are the first person going into a room saying something, like, great, be the leader, know your rights, like, full charge ahead, you know, and enjoy the ripple effect.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more. So if anybody's got one back on the standing in the back there.
So whenever you're writing something that's kind of based off of you or one of the writers, do you find that it's easier to kind of lean into that as the character, or do you like differentiate like that story from that person? Like, for instance, I'm trying to write a pilot about having a heart attack from doing a lot of cocaine at 22, and at first I was like, oh, this is easy. I've told this story. But then when I started passing it around to people, I was like, oh shit, this is all just me on the paper. And I'm starting to get like, wondering if I should like pull back a little bit, or just kind of, any general advice you have on that?
Well, I mean, specificity is the best, usually the best way to depict a character. There's even, I mean, when I was working on Everybody Was Raymond, Phil Rosenthal would constantly say, you know, if it's happening in your house, it's probably happening in a lot of houses. And so to start from there is really the way to do it. You can always then step back, and once you have a piece of work, it can be altered in any way. You know, give your script to friends, trusted advisors, they'll give you notes. Then, you know, because then it's a piece of fiction and you can do anything to it. But you know, it's much better to start from, I had this experience and I want to tell this story. Then you have to make the story compelling. You know, the story, you know, the changes need to be made basically from a fictional standpoint to make it interesting, as opposed to like, you know, I guess censoring it. You know, if you're comfortable with it being told and it's an interesting story, that is a great place to start.
Happy you're alive.
And with that, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. Please thank our panelists for being here. Enjoy the rest of your festival, and thank you.